That's right, folks. Another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. Today is Friday. We're breaking down the slot versus wide points per game allowed tool over on Razzball.com. Join us as we break down the biggest matchup upgrades and key injuries in the secondary and the receiving core that will impact your lineups in Week 8. All that and more starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. The man from down under, the greatest fantasy football mind south of the equator. It's Ben freaking Wasley, folks. You can follow him at Fantasy First Down. Drop the no O on Twitter. What's going on, Ben?
What is happening? I just woke up and I am fired out of the cannon. I am ready to go. Puka Nacua yesterday, I had him ranked higher than most people, and the whole game I was like, yes, give me those sweet fantasy points. It was so good. I don't know what they were doing, but gosh, I'm excited.
I can't say I was ready for it. I was not. I listened to Sports Injury Central, guy coming off injury, late active. I was like, I'll just take a wait and see approach on him. Well, yeah. I waited and saw my bench get a lot of points in that league. So that's okay. You know what? It is what it is. I've always been an overly cautious fantasy player, and that's why I probably suck at it. All right, that's all we got for the show. Thank you for joining us once again. We are out of here. No, we are not. Today is the slot versus wide points per game allowed analysis. We are officially about to cross the halfway mark of the fantasy football season. And if you haven't joined us on the channel, we break down the slot versus wide tool over on Razzball.com. If you don't know what that is, we have broken out fantasy points allowed by defense in the slot and out wide. So really, it's a very helpful tool for your wide receiver starts and sits. And we break it down in today's show. We talk about the biggest matchup upgrades for Week 8. That's a really good way of identifying maybe players. This is good for props as well. Also DFS, maybe undervalued players. Basically, the players that have the best matchup upgrade versus their early season schedule. So guys that could really break out this week and or are becoming auto starts that normally might not be. And finally, we're going to break down some injuries. And oh boy, is it a doozy, Ben Wasley. We have a bunch of key secondary and wide receiver injuries that are going to impact our lineups this week. So I'm excited to go through that this week as well. Before we dive in, since it is the wide receiver show, I wanted to get your thoughts quickly on DeAndre Hopkins joining the Chiefs. We did talk about it on Wednesday, but since you're kind of doing your thing this year with wide receivers, what you thought about DeAndre Hopkins?
I guess I'm kind of excited, but mainly for Mahomes. Like, it feels like it's going to elevate the offense in general, but it's probably going to hurt most of the other pass catchers very slightly, but also make the offense slightly more functional, so that'll give back a little bit. But just in general, Mahomes having another reliable set of hands to pass to, that's got to be helpful. It's going to be probably bad news for Juju because realistically, it signals his injuries are the more serious than we realize, or they just don't fully really trust him or someone else in their role. So it's going to be really interesting. Kind of excited for Hopkins because it can't possibly be worse than his situation with Levis/Rudolph, but I don't know that he suddenly becomes a reliable fantasy starter. I still think he's going to be someone that's not going to get a full route tree.
I'm in. Give me Andy Reid. Give me Mahomes. I'm excited. I know I don't know what he will be in the sense of like, does he have wide receiver 1 upside? Probably not. But at the same time, I mean, just like the way Mahomes works is like when you have a talented player, he peppers them. We saw it with Rashee Rice. We saw a glimpse with Juju Smith-Schuster, I guess. But like when he has a guy, Mahomes knows how to get to him. And I think Hopkins is going to be great with him. I mean, honestly, Andy Reid will figure out ways to scheme up him in the right way. He'll use him the right way. And he's still got the talent, I think. So it has like a little bit of like the Raiders with Randy Moss getting traded to the Patriots in the sense of like you have this super all-pro, former Pro Bowl guy goes to no man's land, kind of, dilly-dallies around there. And now all of a sudden he's going to be with the guy, the MVP. So I'm in. I don't know what that means for a trade value. I probably off the top of my head don't know how much of a DeAndre Hopkins I'll be willing to acquire because, I would trade Michael Pittman to get DeAndre Hopkins for that kind of scenario. So I think Pittman's kind of held a little bit higher in regard, but I like Hopkins long-term. So that's probably so. And I pick on Michael Pittman a lot, unfortunately. I got to come up with another name. So I think everybody kind of knows I'm not the highest on Michael Pittman, but it is what it is. All right, we got Epic Fail in the chat. Hey, how you doing, Epic Fail? Good to see you as always. Thank you for joining. We also have Jamie. Raspball's on fire, but in a good way. All right. Don't call your authorities in the local area. All right. Let's talk about the top 5 matchup upgrades for week 8. Now, the key here is, remember, these are upgrades. So we're going to have Ben Wasley kind of explain to us, hey, should we be starting these guys? Are they streamers? Because the first one is the Denver freaking Broncos. And boy, oh boy, do they have a fun matchup this week against the Carolina Panthers team that literally are probably starting all their second team at this point, trading away guys, injured guys, you name it. They got 2 notable names, Cortland Sutton and Troy Franklin on the outside. Their early season out wide schedule has been the 3rd toughest. So it has been really tough for the outside receivers for the Broncos. They have not been doing it with Cortland Sutton, who had 0 points last week. But this week they get the Panthers, 4th most fantasy points allowed out wide. Talk to us, Ben Wasley. Are you finally going to trust Cortland Sutton or maybe even sprinkle in Troy Franklin?
I mean, Cortland Sutton for a long time has been someone where you need a touchdown for him really to pay off. That tends to be his thing. He makes big plays, he gets touchdowns. This feels like a game where there's going to be some touchdowns. You can't say that often for the Broncos. They're usually grinding out wins, but you have to feel against the Panthers that they're going to score. I like Sutton this week. I think he's going to have a bounce back. I look at last week's game and go, he had a donut? Really? We can't let that happen again. They're going to scheme him up. They're going to make sure that he's involved early on. And I do think he's someone that kind of slides in as that wide receiver 3 kind of guy. I do think he's going to be very solid. I would definitely put him in my lineup if I'm looking for someone with a little bit of pop. As for Troy Franklin, I mean, he's still not running a full snap count. He's still kind of sharing with Vele and Humphrey. They're kind of swimming around in this weird committee for the wide receiver 2 and 3 role. His snaps are rising, but you can't trust him to start just yet. He's more someone that I'm happy to stash, and he could have a big pop week. And if he does, all of a sudden, he's someone that everyone's going to want. So he's more of like a beat the waiver wire kind of guy.
I think this is what worries me about this is that Bryce Young is starting, and he's starting with no Deontay Johnson, no Adam Thielen. And it's like Carolina, I don't really know how excited I am for their offense this week. This could be a 21-7-10 game, and the Broncos just run the ball down their throats, and it's a big Javonte week. That being said, like Cortland Sutton, I think the problem is we have recency bias. And like if you just forget about last week, 15 fantasy points, 15, 13 in PPR in 3 of the last 4 games before that. So yes, he put up a donut. It was bad. But 3 of the 4 games previously, he was in double digits. And now he has the Panthers. Just, you got to trust the process. He's a wide receiver 3 this week. I think if you need a starter dealing with injuries, I think Cortland Sutton should be in your lineups. All right, let's jump down to number 2. And this one, Ben, tread lightly because my sweet angel, Romeo, I'm basically the Juliet of fantasy football at this point because Romeo Dobbs is my guy. Like I've been in, I'm all in. He's now starting to get hot with Jordan Love. Now he has the premier out wide matchup. The Jacksonville Jaguars, I feel like I think the Jaguars defense might be my favorite defense. They have given to the fantasy community more than anybody. Probably more than Scott Fish at this point. I mean, that's how much they give the Jaguars defense to outside receivers. Early season schedule has been good though for the Packers top 10, but this week it just doesn't match. I mean, number 1, the Jaguars have allowed a wide receiver to score 19 PPR points in 5 of 7 games. That's pretty good. Now the question is Dobbs going to be locked into the lineups this week? Are you looking at guys like Wicks, for example, maybe even Watson? What's your thoughts about the Packers in this plus matchup?
The Packers are a weird one because Romeo Dobbs is their only every down starter. I know that's not what it looks like, but Dobbs is out there all the time. Meanwhile, they've got Jaden Reed in really only in 11 personnel. He's just extremely efficient because he's out of the slot when he's in 11 personnel. And then they're kind of rotating Christian Watson and Dontavian Wicks, which makes neither of them useful unless the other one gets injured. And they're both healthy for the first time in quite some time. I guess they were last week, but now they're both fully healthy. And so you can't start either of them. They don't even have a clear role for either of them. Traditionally, it's been Watson doing the receiving routes and then Wicks doing the run game stuff. And all of a sudden, that's kind of switched over the last couple of weeks. So you can't trust either. It's really only Dobbs you can trust. And that's why Dobbs has been a stash for me for the last couple of weeks. And this is when you start him. This is where you can start relying on Romeo Dobbs. This is why Bobby has been right. And you've got to listen to him. Start the man, start Romeo Dobbs this week.
Love him. Just did. Honestly, Romeo Dobbs, it's funny. The problem is, like, when you have a player you're super high on, there's just no value for him at that point. I don't have a realistic idea of Romeo Dobbs. And the funny part was, like, there's a guy in my league. I'm the 1 seed in this one league. And the guy that I like, he has Nico Collins, and he's on the outside of the playoffs. And I'm thinking, maybe if I offer him Romeo Dobbs and maybe like a, Chuba Hubbard, that should get it done. And then I had to take a step back. I'm like, there's no freaking way you're getting Nico Collins for Romeo Dobbs. But after this week, I'm telling you, when Romeo Dobbs drops a nice 15 PPR points in this game, you're going to be very happy you have him in your roster. He's going to be fantastic over the second half of the season. All right, number 3. And now this really goes back to George Pickens. Now he's coming off this big game with Russell Wilson. And be honest with you, George Pickens looked like Cortland Sutton did last year with Russell. Russell, for whatever it's worth, the boy could throw a real nice deep ball. And it was on. Listen, I have to eat some crow. I wasn't a big fan of them sitting Justin Fields. I thought Fields deserved to play. But after watching Russ on Sunday Night Football, I'm like, you know what? Now, listen, the Jets' entire secondary was injured, essentially. Even Sauce Gardner was banged up. No DJ Reed. Their safeties were out. But now he gets to face the Giants. So, hey, well, you're going to be fine, Russ. So you got Russ this week going up against the Giants. George Pickens' early season out wide schedule was 31st. That's no bueno. Now he gets a top 7 matchup against the Giants. The question is George Pickens an auto start this week, Ben Wasley?
I don't think anyone outside like the top 5 is a true auto start, but I really like Pickens this week. He's kind of on the edge of the top 12 for me. He's going to be very good in this matchup. He's going to be very good with Russ. The weirdest thing about Pickens is in week 5, he had his lowest snap count of his career, of his whole career. They just didn't use him, and they said it was kind of like just to protect him a little bit. I'm like, we don't want you to protect him. Use him. Like, that's why you've got him. He's your only viable wide receiver. Use him. And yet they, for some reason, weren't. And he slowly started to ease back in week 6. And then last week, he actually went back to his usual snap count, which is still below the snap count of most wide receivers. But it's well and truly enough because they run the ball so much. They can afford to have him off occasionally because they know they're going to use him when they run pass plays. And that's exactly what they did last week. And that's exactly what they're going to do this week. I do think that Pickens is someone that you really should be starting ahead of anyone that's not like a total stud. I think Pickens is a very viable option. And in most leagues, he's going to be in your lineup.
What about a guy like Devonta Smith? Would you start him over Devonta Smith?
I would start him over Devonta Smith, yes.
Okay. Let's throw out another one here. Darnell Mooney.
Definitely. I have him tiers. Like, I'm starting him ahead of Garrett Wilson, DJ Moore, like Zay Flowers, these kind of guys. Like, I'm pretty high on him this week.
That's all I need to know. There you go. All right, number 4. And just when you think the Browns, you just when you're about to give up, the Watson thing. And listen, I said this on the last show, so I shouldn't say it again. Listen, I feel for Watson. Sorry, you tore your Achilles. But Jameis Winston is going to infuse enthusiasm into that offense. Will have a spark. And honestly, this week, the Ravens are not going to be scared to crush the Browns. Now, granted, these AFC North matchups are always uglier than we expect. They always play each other tough, even when the Browns are the Browns. The Browns have been a good football team overall outside of Deshaun Watson for the last few years. So now that Winston's in, we saw what happened with Flacco last year. Now, should we expect Winston to be Flacco? No, but there's a range of outcomes where he's a lot closer to Flacco than he is Deshaun Watson. And now the matchup for the Ravens are an imposing defense. But the problem is, when you look at the numbers, everybody is able to keep up with the Ravens offense to an extent. Maybe it's because the offense has put up a bunch of points, but they are the second most fantasy points allowed out wide. So the thought is, you got Tillman coming off a big game. You got Jerry Jeudy, who has yet to really emerge. Does Jameis Winston and company finally give you some excitement to maybe start or stream one of these Browns receivers?
Absolutely. For me, Jameis Winston, he's like fantasy football catnip. He gets me excited. He should get you
Nice.
excited. He is going to like stimulate a whole heap of points for you. Look, against this Raven secondary, which is frankly pretty porous, look, high upside for the Browns outside receivers, but lots of risk. But you're talking cheap points. I think Cedric Tillman's available in most leagues, for example. So he's someone you can think about starting. He was definitely the big target for everybody last week. And now he's got a chance of having another big week. But we've seen Jerry Jeudy actually have some pretty solid target share so far this season, even with Amari Cooper. Amari's gone, Winston's in. You have to feel like Judy's got a good chance of putting up points as well. Basically, you have to throw on the Ravens. Their run game is so good that it's the only way for you to have even a chance of keeping up with them for a while. I do feel like there's a good chance that Jeudy and Tillman have good games, but gosh, they're very risky, because it is also the kind of situation where they just get absolutely blown out of the water.
So here's an interesting stat. So I prefer Tillman. I just feel like there's something there with the kid. But yeah, I found it interesting when I was when I was just doing my normal thinking throughout the day. I thought to myself, I wonder what the deal with the rate. How do like these receivers dominate? Is it yards after the catch, or is it air yards? Are they taking a bunch of shots? And how the Ravens, you beat them, is air yards. They actually lead the NFL in air yards allowed. And Jerry Jeudy is the A dot guy in this offense. And so sometimes I'm like, like if you are, let's say you're the underdog in your matchup this week. Honestly, I think Jerry Jeudy, if he's on your roster, like this is probably the matchup where you gotta give him a shot, like as a wide receiver 3 high upside, because he's good. He gets the A dot. The Ravens allow the most air yards. And on top of that, they are a good out wide defense. And on top of that, their top cornerback, Marlon Humphrey, will be out this week. And I know Humphrey plays a lot in the slot, but he is the number one guy. So, I, I mean, come on, let's go. And he's got Jameis Winston. By the way, if you go back to 2022 when Jameis Winston was the starter for the Saints, that 3-game stretch, he had Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry, and Chris Olave. All 3 of those guys had some type of production and some positive games in that 3-game sample. So Jameis can do it. So I'm in. Come on, let's have some fun. Browns, maybe DFS, maybe check out those player prop lines. Let's get in there. Let's get some Jerry Jeudy overs this week, folks. I'm excited. All right, number 5. The last one is the New York Jets. The Jets did have, we've already talked about this ad nauseum, how tough their early season schedule is. But, now they get a rematch against the Patriots. Early season schedule was the 28th overall, so a really tough early season out wide schedule for Wilson. Now Adams comes right when things start getting easy. Devontae Adams decides to show up and look all cool, whatever, man. But now they get a top 10 match against the Patriots. Wilson had a really good match. This is where things started turning for Wilson a few weeks back against New England. 2 wide receivers to hit double-digit fantasy points against New England in 4 of 7 games. Now, on top of that, teaser, Allen Lazard is doubtful. So that should really boost up the targets there as well for Wilson and Adams. Are both those guys in your lineups this week?
Absolutely. They're both going to be wide receiver 2s. I think individually they would be wide receiver 1s, but they do kind of impact each other. You can't expect them both to have boom games, and you don't know which one will. But I do think we're going to see a lot of production out of both Wilson and Adams. Adams certainly took no time at all getting himself acclimatized to the offense, and I feel like he's going to be ready to go, shot out of a cannon this week. He does some weird stuff, Devontae Adams. Did you see that video where he's criticizing their sideline for not celebrating enough? Like, you just arrived at the team, dude. Like, that's not the best way to make friends, but he's a competitor, and he's going to want to win. He's going to want to be involved, and Aaron Rodgers loves him. So you've got to feel like he's going to be heavily involved. And Garrett Wilson, even with Adams there, was still getting a lot of targets. So for me, they're both slightly below, for example, a Pickens, but they're still very much in like the teens in my rankings. And that means in most situations, you're going to be starting them.
So really kind of spinning off before we get into some of the key injuries this week. Jamie's all in, got Pickens ranks. He's top. Throw it. If you haven't checked out the chat, folks, you're listening on the audio side, you're missing out. You should definitely join us every Friday at 5, baby. Friday at 5, we do a little slot versus wide. That just flows off the tongue. Real nice. Join us on the YouTube channel. We do it live, me and Ben Wasley. You can check out the chat on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel, because also if you just subscribe to the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel, you can join us on Sunday for 2 hours before kickoff. We do starts and sits, baby. I'm almost debating on jumping on an hour early to talk about all the injuries because it's just absurd right now. We do a injury segment, but man, it's a lot now. But anyway, um, basically, Jamie's all in on Pickens this week. I like that call. Would you start? Epic Fail has a question about Dobbs. I appreciate you having him on your roster. Would you start him over top receivers this week? Maybe Higgins. T. Higgins and the Bengals are facing, don't know off the top of my head now who they're facing this week.
Eagles.
Okay. Or Adams. Of course, Adams, the Jets going against New England. I would have to say probably not. I think where the question for me comes if a wide receiver 2 on the 18 to 24 side has a tough matchup. Maybe that's where I'll start Dobbs. I'm not I think Higgins against the Eagles and Adams against the Patriots are not bad matchups. So I'm not going to sit those studs or mid-range wide receiver 2s for a guy like Dobbs. What's your thoughts, Ben?
Yeah, look, we are excited about Dobbins relative to how we usually feel about him for the earlier part of the season, but you can't start him over these good, reliable options. You have to be starting your Higgins and your Adams. They're just more likely to have big games. Now, Dobbs might have a massive game, but he's significantly more likely to have a dud game as well. And that's just always the case with these lower down players. This is why you start your studs, because your studs are more likely to put up solid games even when things go wrong for them, because they're going to be schemed into the offense a little bit more effectively, whereas Dobbs is going to have to require actually earning his targets rather than having them schemed up for him.
Yeah. What about Marvin Harrison? Marvin Harrison's got Miami this week. Really tough matchup. Would you start Dobbs over Marvin Harrison?
Oh, interesting. I think I probably do. Like, I do think it's very difficult to trust Harrison this week. They're kind of like that. They'll be right in the same region for me. You don't need to pass against Miami. I don't trust Harrison at the moment. I know that most people have Harrison ranked high because we do still kind of think of him as one of those studs, but I don't know that he actually belongs in that category.
Okay. All right. There you go. So Watson got injured. However, that would never have happened if he was where he belongs, sitting in jail on Sundays. Okay, Jamie, a little feisty, my friend. Well, we're gonna move on. All right, key injuries for week 8. Speaking of injuries, Jamie's got let us in. By the way, Jamie, thank you for being a part of the show. It's like you lead me right in. Even though that was a little aggressive, I forgive you. You're
All
a
right.
sweet angel. We appreciate you. All right, so today we're gonna do a little bit of speed round. As you know, Friday is the day where injuries start popping out, coming out of the woodworks, and we start seeing maybe some like Adam Schefter's of the world. They tweet out, guys, this wide receiver, that wide receiver, this quarterback, that quarterback. What we're going to do today is really kind of focus more on the secondary and how that could impact your fantasy lineups for wide receivers. And we're also going to talk a little bit about wide receivers too, because that's going to impact the wide receivers. So speed round, I'm going to ask Ben Wasley if he feels like these injuries impact his thoughts about these players. The first one, we're going to jump down to Arizona. Sean Murphy-Bunting, one of the top outside cornerbacks for the Arizona Cardinals, is out. Is that going to impact Hill and Waddle? Are you excited to start them a little more this week at home?
I was already excited to start them, and now I'm even more excited. I feel like Waddle is going to be massively underused this week, and this is when he's good. When he has Tua, he's good. And this is a very good matchup for them. I definitely like the idea of using Waddle. I also like the idea of trading for Waddle. I think this is the end of your buy low window for Jalen Waddle. So, look, I feel like Bobby's not going to be on board with this, but I would be buying Jalen Waddle.
If you could get his current value in a trade, sure. But if someone's going to ask for a wide receiver 2 value for him, no, thank you. I'm not doing that. No.
Yeah.
I don't know what the trade is. What would be a good Waddle trade in your mind, Ben? Like, what player would you trade away? Like a Darnell Mooney, would you trade away to get Waddle back?
Oh, I like a Xavier Worthy is someone I'd feel really good about trading away. Like Jackson Smith and Najigba, these guys that look really shiny, but realistically they're very boom bust. I feel like you can get some value out of them relative to Waddle because he's had so many bad weeks. I had someone ask me if he should be dropping Jalen Waddle this week. Like, this is where he's viewed. Like, there are people who just want to get rid of him. And I feel like if you can find the right person, you are going to be able to get Waddle very, very cheaply. But even if someone wants someone like a Mooney, I would be very, very tempted.
Sure. If you could make that kind of deal, I agree. I sometimes I think it doesn't hurt and I got to do more of this too, to just ask the owner, hey, what do you want for this player? Just get a feel for it, because I make assumptions all the time that people are up to date and know everything and they're into it. Like, you don't want to make bad trades and fuck over people, excuse my French, but you don't want to mess up your league and do like a really shitty Waddle trade. But it's not your responsibility always to be on top of the other manager's knowledge. And by the way, it's fantasy football. Anything can happen anyway. So people can't veto trades. You don't veto trades on the first place because you never know what's going to happen anyway. But that being said, if you could do something like Ben said, I do like that as well. Let's shift out to the Carolina Panthers. Deontay Johnson's going to be out with Adam Thielen. Now they're going up against the Broncos. It's Bryce Young's going to be starting. Is there anybody in that receiving core that maybe you'll consider with Deontay Johnson also out?
I mean, I think Xavier Leggett's the name that immediately jumps to mind. He's someone that I was very high on in the preseason, not necessarily for this season. He's just a talent I really like. He was very good at South Carolina. I had it in college fantasy. Talked about him a lot in the preseason. I'm excited about him as a long-term prospect, but gosh, it's really hard to trust him in this situation. So Tane's back. I don't know that you can trust him. And then after that, it's kind of like Jalen Coker, and you'd have to be in a really deep league to be thinking about him. So for me, probably not.
The next one is the Bears. The Bears are going to be down two guys in their secondary, Kyle Gordon and Jaquan Brisker. That's their safety. Kyle Gordon is the slot guy. The Bears are really tough against receivers in general. Does this kind of shake up in the secondary get you? Marcus Mariota probably going to start this week for the Commanders. Does this change your mind maybe about Terry McLaurin, for example?
It's interesting. I mean, look, if Jalen Daniels starts, and I think there's a chance of that, even though I wouldn't call it likely. Certainly, then McLaurin becomes someone you can feel pretty good about in most matchups. But this isn't the greatest of matchups, and I feel like he's going to be ranked lower than he would be most weeks. I think this drops him below guys that we've talked about, like your Pickens, like your Adams, like your even Waddle. I feel like he could end up in the same general area as that because of the matchup, but the injuries do help a little bit. The problem is they're more likely to help the slot guy, and they don't have a slot guy. They kind of just move it around between guys like Zacchaeus and McCaffrey. Noah Brown is
Could be
also
Ertz.
involved in this offense. A lot of Ertz. Like, I can't feel good about any commander that is not Terry McLaurin. Noah Brown's clearly the second best, but this is not the matchup for him.
Expect a heavy dose of Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler in this game. How you beat the Bears is on the ground. All right, let's jump down to another one. I want to talk quickly about the Chiefs. Chiefs did lose one of their young outside cornerbacks, Jalen Watson, this week. Now, the Chiefs have been extremely tough on the perimeter all season long. Obviously, the Raiders are not an offense that you're overly excited about, but it does sound like Jacoby Myers will be back this week. Myers, any shot he's in any of your lineups?
I mean, it's one of those like desperation flex situations. There's no bias this week, so you're not missing plays that you wouldn't otherwise be missing. I feel like that if you're starting Myers, you're in a little bit of a pickle, especially first week back, coming off an injury. I don't fully trust it. I think that they're going to generally, and with Gardner Minshew as well, I don't trust it.
All right. Let's shift out to the Chargers, and this one's interesting against the Saints. Quentin Johnston's going to be out again. We did kind of see a little bit of the Chargers offense kind of spark some life in that pass game. Will Dissly became, one of the greatest tight ends of all time last week. But the Saints have been kind of vulnerable this year out in the perimeter, even with Marshawn Lattimore, because they'll be down Paulson Adebo on the other side in the outside cornerback. Lattimore has not shadowed. Any interest in maybe a Chargers receiver in this matchup?
Not really. Lad McConkey's the main one that you can really trust for the Chargers. He's the one actually getting the reliable snap count, but he's not doing a lot with it. He's just getting like a solid amount of targets for you to feel okay about him in PPR. Out wide with Johnston out, all of a sudden it's a whole heap of Semi Fehoko. He's someone in a super deep league. Like, I'm talking like 32 teams, and I am in a few of these where I've picked him up. But even then, I don't feel great about starting him. Joshua Palmer, I'm not even starting him in a 14-team league. DJ Chark might be back soon. Like, this whole wide receiver room, it's ugly. I want as few shares as possible.
The fact that Semi Fadiku is getting more routes than Josh Palmer, God, It hurts. It hurts. It hurts a lot. All right. Let's jump down to the Patriots. Jalen Polk will be out this week. Does that get you excited against the Jets for anybody, maybe Demario Douglas in that matchup?
Um, I think that this will have zero impact on Douglas because he is just playing an 11 personnel and he'll continue to just play an 11 personnel. I think who this really helps is Kayshon Boutte and Kendrick Bourne as well. The three of them have been rotating through the outside receiver slots, and it's been hurting all of them because none of them are playing a full snap count. All of a sudden, you remove one of them, the other two become full-time starters. Does that mean I'm going out and trying to get some Boutte? Not in fantasy football, particularly. I'm not
Whoa. I
overly.
like it. I mean, this is a
Look,
kid's show. All right. Let's keep it PG. Come on. Jamie's about to
not in
leave. He's
fantasy
upset.
football. No, never. No innuendo here. Look, realistically, I don't think he's someone you can rely on. We know that Kendrick Bourne's been really good at times in the past, but those times are very much in the past, and he might have a breakout week this week, and I wouldn't totally put it past him. But as soon as Polk comes back, he's going to be useless again. So what's the point in getting him involved on your roster?
Just a side note, the Jets will be down 3 safeties this week. I think Hunter Henry's an interesting play at home against the Jets. This is a sidebar, extra thought there. Let's jump down to the Eagles. Obviously, Dallas Goedert's going to be out. I think that just kind of solidifies A.J. Brown and company. I'm not really overthinking it. It's going to be Smith and Brown. But is there any hesitation in a tougher kind of secondary for the Cincinnati Bengals on Devonta Smith this week?
I mean, Smith is one of those weird ones that fits in that same category as Jalen Waddle, where because he's the number 2, he's not as schemed up as much as he is as the number 1 guy. And therefore, you can't rely on him to definitely get his target. So he's more likely to put up those like 0, 1, 2 target games. But he's still more reliable than most options. I'd still start him over a Romeo Dobbs. He's kind of in that same category as guys like Amari Cooper and people like that, where you have to feel like they've got some upside, but because of the matchup, you have to rank him a little bit lower. And I'd rather have someone with a little bit more upside if they're a reliable upside option.
All right, we're jumping down to Seattle. DK Metcalf is doubtful. Can you just tell me I could start JSN finally against the Buffalo Bills?
You can start Jake Bobo against the Buffalo Bills.
Woo! Jake Bobo.
I just have a feeling like every time there's an injury, Jake Bobo comes in and all of a sudden he's a functional wide receiver. If you're in a deep league, and again, we're talking deep, more than 12 teams, Jake Bobo is not the most ridiculous start this week because he will get those snaps and he'll get targets. He won't be as good as the DK Metcalf with the targets, but he'll definitely get targets. JSN will have a big game in the slot games, in a game where he's got a really good slot matchup. This is not one of them. So for that reason, I'm not overly excited about JSN because of the injury any more than I would be otherwise. He's kind of like a mid to low wide receiver 3. But Bobo, I mean, if you're desperate, I'm keen. Bobo.
Jake Bobo, 4 for 61-1, the lone game last year. DK Metcalf missed against the Arizona Cardinals. That's an interesting fun fact to you. By the way, 2 years ago when Jake Bobo was coming out, Peter King actually said that when he went to Seattle, all they would talk about is how good this kid is, Jake Bobo. And honestly, I think if he wasn't on the deepest wide, like one of the 2-3 deepest wide receiver cores in football, he would be almost an every down. He would be an every down player. I just think he's behind DK Metcalf, JSN, and Tyler Lockett, who are better than him maybe at this stage. But I've heard nothing but good things, and he always seems to produce. And by the way, he's getting on the field and getting targets now when they have that receiving core. JSN is probably my biggest bust of the season. Terrible. It's been awful. Honestly, granted, I will say this. Yes, the Buffalo Bills aren't a good matchup overall for receivers, but they are a slot funnel defense. They do allow 45% of their fantasy points to the slot. That's 4% higher than league average. So if you were to pick a guy, it should be JSN in this matchup. But unfortunately, I'll be wrong because I've been wrong about him all year long. All right, 49ers are going to be down, of course, Ayuk and Juwan Jennings versus the Cowboys. I guess my question for you is, Ricky Parasol, if Debo's limited, or is it just ride with George Kittle and Jordan Mason this week?
I think we're going to see a whole lot of Kittle and Mason. I think if Debo starts, you still start him, unless we get a clear report that he's going to be heavily limited, and I think that's very possible. The 49ers, they're amazing in so many different ways, but they're really bad at managing injuries and injured players, and you just don't know what they're going to do. Usually, if they've got an injured player, they'll just use them fully as if they're not injured at all, and then they end up with more injured players. But it is possible that this week we do see a limited or an out Debo. If Debo's out, is it Ricky Pearsall? I mean, potentially, but there's a lot of risk there. They do have plenty of deeper options that they'll get involved. You'll see some Jacob Cowing, who's another rookie. You'll see some random guys like your Chris Conleys and your Ronnie Bells and stuff. You're not starting any of them. They're just in there enough to be really inconvenient. So Pearsall's kind of like the bottom of the barrel option when it comes to that, and everyone else is out of the barrel altogether.
All right. So let's jump down to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, of course, are out after that unfortunate Godwin injury and Mike Evans being out. This week, the Bucs, they are facing the Atlanta Falcons again. Honestly, I like Kate Otten a lot this week, but is there any interest in guys like Nick Millen or Sterling Shepard in their matchups?
I agree. I like Cat Otten. I like the running backs. We saw when those injuries happen. And by the way, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, they're my most owned players across all of fantasy because I kind of saw that happening this year. And I'm so sad that the injury is going to limit my ability to take advantage. It's very sad. And because like they're good players and they're fun to watch and they're human beings as well, obviously. But who gets to take advantage? I think it's probably Otten. I think it's probably Rashad White. I think he's probably going to be more involved because he is the receiving back. I think they both increase in value. Is there going to be a wide receiver? It can go one of two ways. When a wide receiver 3 steps up into the wide receiver 1 category, you either get a Trey Tucker situation where they still suck and the whole offense craters and they rely on the tight end and the running backs, or you get a Juwan Jennings situation where they suddenly pop off and have a massive game. And you just don't know what's going to happen until it happens. I feel like because they've kind of got 3 viable, roughly equally talented options, it's not going to be like McMillan is suddenly the clear number 1 target, but you'll certainly get the routes of the number 1 guy. And then you'll see some Trey Palmer, and you'll also see a little bit of Sterling Shepard as well. I think the real question is who gets the slot role, because it's the slot role that's really valuable for the Bucs. I think it's probably going to be split between some Shepard who got it when all the injuries happen. And I think you're going to see a little bit of Jalen McMillan there as well, because he has traditionally gone into the slot a little bit as well. If he can win the slot role, all of a sudden he's someone you want on your fantasy team.
Jamel Dean on the other side is also going to be out for the Tampa Bay Bucs. That's their top outside cornerback. Does this kind of give you, I know Drake London's probably in everyone's lineups for the most part, but Darnell Mooney this week, what's your thoughts on him?
I think he's a solid, high-end wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2. We saw what he did last time against the Bucs when they were healthy. It was 16 targets or something insane, over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. I feel like given what he's been able to do in the past, I don't know that you can easily sit him just because of that upside, but how often do you see the return game happen in the second half of the season and all of a sudden the game script is just totally different and it's nothing like what happened last time? I mean, NFL teams are not dumb. They're not going to go into the game and go, oh, that went really well last time. We should just do exactly the same thing. That's rarely how it works, and that's why you don't often see the same players boom, but there are just some matchups that suit some players, and it's possible that this is a matchup that suits Mooney, and I'm willing to take that risk.
All right, the last one I want to talk about today is L'Jarius Sneed. The Titans are going to be out without him. Now, of course, on the other side of the football, Jameson Williams is out. So the question is for you, knowing the Titans matchup against the Lions will be at home, the Titans are going to be the Titans, and their offense has been kind of bland. Any interest in maybe a second Lions wide receiver this week with that notable outside cornerback out at home in this matchup?
Tim Patrick. No, not really Tim Patrick. Look, I do think that Tim Patrick, if you're in one of those really, really deep leagues that I mentioned earlier, he's a viable option, but I don't get, he doesn't get me up in the morning. I'm not excited about Tim Patrick. There's not really anyone else.
This podcast gets you up in the morning, apparently. All right. So that's what I like to hear.
It literally did.
So.
Look, I can't trust Tim Patrick. Khalif Raymond will always somehow find ways to get irritatingly involved when we least expect it. But realistically, Patrick's the only guy that's going to have a reliable route count. And for that reason, I'm not really excited about anybody, even though I think that Patrick could have a solid game.
Yeah, I mean, just feels like it's going to be a David Montgomery and Gibbs game. They're just going to punch him right in the mouth. I can't imagine the Titans on the road in Detroit beating up on the Lions or keeping it competitive enough to where Jared Goff has to drop back a bunch of times and throw. And then you got Laporta and also Amon-Ra. Yeah. All right. Let's just before we finish up the show, Ben, you got your article you drop every single week, your starts and sits of the week using the slot versus wide tool. Is there any names we haven't talked about today you want to bring up before we close out the show?
Yes, although I do want to ask you an injury-related question of my own.
All right.
Zay Flowers potentially out, even though he trained on Friday. Are you randomly interested in Rashad Bateman this week if Zay Flowers is out?
I am. I'm interested. I like Bateman a lot. I talked about him last week. If you look at the Cleveland Browns, they're kind of just average across the board when it comes to our metrics against wide receivers. I think the biggest issue that I found with Bateman is that it's sometimes dictated on the game flow. Tampa Bay was the perfect matchup for him. I know Derrick Henry broke out in the third quarter, but if you watch that game, the Bucks, you can't just run on the Bucks. It's not how you beat them. You beat them with the vertical passing game, and that's how Bateman flourished. Cleveland, I would say this: if Flowers is out, I like Bateman better this week. If he's in, I don't think they're going to need him that much, to be honest with you. So, I think he's a solid wide receiver 3. That's what I was saying.
Yep. I'm with you. He is the wide receiver 22 on the season league wide, which is kind of wild. And he was the wide receiver 2 last week. He's going to have boom games, but you're not randomly really excited about him without a Flowers injury. Now, let me talk about some starts and sits. We've covered all of my starts, which is good news for you. We've given you a whole heap of quality content here, but couple of sits for you. Marvin Harrison Jr., look, he's been disappointing the last few weeks. He gets the Dolphins. I absolutely don't trust him. We talked about Xavier Legard as well. Chris Olave against the Chargers, coming back from injury. No Derek Carr. Chargers secondary is very good. I do not love the idea of starting Chris Olave this week. I just don't trust this situation. I don't know what's going on, especially if Taysom Hill comes back. We know how he takes touches away from the wide receivers as well. I feel like even though Olave might be the only weapon in town, I still feel like they're going to use a whole lot of Alvin Kamara, and you're going to see some random other guys pop up as well. And Christian Kirk, gosh, he has been frustratingly inconsistent this season. He's got 3 games with over 60 yards, and a couple of them even had double-digit targets, but he's also got 3 games with literally 1 reception. They're just not using him outside 11 personnel, and that makes him very boom-bust. The Packers are excellent against slot receivers. He's at risk of another breadstick, which is what I'm calling a 1-reception game. So I'm not touching him in this matchup at all.
All right, let's jump into some questions before we close out the show. And sorry, folks, my computer's about to die, so let's just get through these really, really quick. We got Debo or DK this week, rest of season. What's your thoughts here, Ben?
I would lean towards DK, but it's very much just a lean. Debo is certainly someone I'm a lot higher on than I was previously because of all the other injuries around him. But CMC is going to be back as well. That's going to hurt him too. I would go with DK for his upside.
Okay. We got epic fail here too as well. Would you do that for my wide? So basically, he's asking JSN and Spears for Tracy. Basically, you're getting JSN back with Nico, Debo, Deontay, Ridley, and Douglas already on the roster. I'm not making that deal. Personally, JSN is just not good. It is what it is. We messed up. What's your thoughts here, Ben?
I'm not particularly excited about JSN, although I'm also not particularly excited about Tracy. So if you've got strong running backs, then I don't think it's entirely crazy to get JSN. But I'm not excited about any of the players involved there. I feel like Spears has a little bit of upside if Pollard goes down, so I think it's fine. If you feel like you really need wide receiver help, I think you probably do need wide receiver help for the near future, but in the far future, you're probably going to be fine without him.
And by the way, just to switch back here to Adam. Adam, by the way, just so you know, we have a rest of season slot versus wide strength of schedule. It's a great tool to use for these kind of questions. If you're just looking at basically what we have here, the best out wide schedule, let's see, Seattle is 19th or 18th, sorry. And then San Francisco is 15th. So they're not too far apart overall. Lean slightly Debo. Without Brandon Ayuk, I lean Debo as well. All right, we got start one. We got Jameis Winston or Anthony Richardson this week. Richardson on the road against Houston. Jameis Winston, baby. The sweet angel, the Schmitty is calling for it against the Ravens. What's your thoughts here, Ben?
I would be tempted to go Winston as well. I'll have them in the same area. I think I would go Winston for upside. If you just want a little bit more of a floor, I think Richardson's got a slightly safer floor. Only slightly, though.
I actually am going to go Richardson as well. I like that matchup in Houston. We want to see Cooper Kupp in the Bucks. I tweeted this out the other day. I think he'd be great with Liam Combs. Actually, I prefer him to stay with the Rams. By the way, I honestly, as long as the Rams keep winning, you stay with the Rams. Matthew Stafford's the better quarterback. I love Baker, but give me that all day. Yeah, but Jamie, thank you for letting the people know. By the way, we're getting there. We're running against the clock here. We got Jamie with his own question. We got Olave or Pittman. I know, gross. Yeah, against Houston on the road for Pittman, and Olave on the road against the Chargers. What do you got here, Ben?
I'm going to go with Olave simply because Pittman with Richardson is not it, and Pittman's clearly not healthy either.
Yeah, I'm going to go Olave as well. And then, of course, Olave or Sutton. Actually, I kind of like Sutton this week in that matchup. What's your thoughts here, Ben?
This is more interesting, but I'm still going to go Olave. I know that sounds crazy given I've talked down Olave and talked up Sutton, but that's how far apart they were previously. Previously, they were kind of like a wide receiver 15 and the wide receiver 40, and they've just kind of moved closer together, but I still have Olave higher.
All right, that's all we got today, folks. We appreciate you joining the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel and joining the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. We broke down the slot versus wide points per game allowed tool, which you can find over on Razzball.com. Go check out that fantasy data tab. We have a bunch of great content and articles from all our great writers over at Razzball.com, including Ben Wasley, who just dropped his latest week 8 starts and sits using the slot versus wide tool. He also does a great article called Streamers and Stashes. And of course, by the way, Ben, tell the people where else they can find your content.
Look, if you want my rankings, ffdfantasyfootball.com. And if you want to hear more of my sweet, highly nuanced Australian accent, you can also check out the Fantasy First Down YouTube channel. Plus, also check us out on Twitter and Instagram, where I tweet out a whole heap of random stuff. Look, Razzball is where it's at. I use all their tools. So if you want my rankings using their tools, you can go there. And if you just want to use the tools yourself, go to the Razzball website, use the slot versus wide analysis tool. It works for me. It'll work for you as well.
All right. The Schmitty, by the way, just quickly, 49ers, Chargers, DST. What do you got, Ben?
Got them back to back. I'd go Niners.
I'm going to go Chargers. I actually think that they're getting healthy, too, and they got that New Orleans offense.
I was thinking Ravens. Go Chargers.
Go Chargers. Go. Epic Fail joining me on Sunday. Sorry, buddy. We got to get out of here. We do appreciate you guys. We love you. We will have our kicker report, which is the most important report every single week on the Sunday live show. So join us for 2 hours before kickoff. Thank you, Ben Wasley, for joining us. Make sure you go follow him at Fantasy First Down NO. I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco. Follow me at Bobby LaMarco on Twitter. We are out of here, folks.